Okay, I'm going to start with my little intro because I'm very anxious to make sure we have as much time as possible for the conversation. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mikey Mhenna. I'm going to ask Diane, one of the co-directors of the Tasmeem Festival, to unmute herself. Okay, so you want to tell everybody a little bit about the festival?
Yes, thank you so much, Mikey. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Diane Durr. I am one of the 4 directors of Tasmeem Doha 2022 Radical Futures. On behalf of my co-directors, Basma Hamdi, Dr. Daniel Imans, and Mesa Al-Mumin, I would like to express just how honored and excited we are for this collaboration with Afikra. Together, we have designed a series of conversations leading to Tasmeem 2022 this coming March, touching on topics that range from the future of language, the future of the Arab image, the future of food, and the future of education, a conversation that we are really looking forward to diving into today with these 2 leading figures in art and design, Dr. Haytham Nawar and Dr. Danah Abdulla. A bit about Tasmeem. Tasmeem Doha is an international biennial art and design conference that's hosted and organized by VCU Arts Qatar since 2004. Each edition of Tasmeem Doha highlights a unique and contemporary theme within art and design, exploring novel concepts, methods, applications, and engaging in critical discussions. The event is open to the public, with attendees and participants consisting of international designers, artists, academics, students, industry professionals, and the local community. The 2022 conference, Radical Futures, addresses the role of design in shaping the future. The event is an inclusive and multifaceted view of the future, one that not only speculates on technological advancements, but on future threats and changes, whether environmental, geographic, cultural, or social. We believe now more than ever, we must ask pertinent questions, raise critical dialogues, and respond with clarity. So to that end, if you think you have a project that fits well within the theme of Radical Futures, we currently have a call out for project submissions and a call for workshop submissions, which we invite you to submit to. You can visit our Instagram page at Tasmeem_Doha and find a link in the bio. So again, that's Tasmeem_Doha, TASMEEM_DOHA. And with that, I will hand it back over to you, Mikey. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Okay, great. Perfect introduction to the conference. So welcome to another podcast focus on the future of education. Our 2 guests are Haytham Nawar, who is an educator, an artist, a designer, scholar. He's the chair of the Department of the Arts at the American University of Cairo, and he's the founder and director of Cairotronica, a festival of electronic and new media arts in Cairo. Haytham, welcome. And then we have also Danah Abdulla, who is a designer, educator, and researcher interested in new narratives and practices in design that push the disciplinary boundaries and definitions of the discipline. In her current role as program director of graphic design at Camberwell, Chelsea and Wimbledon College of Art and University, Wimbledon College of Arts, University of the Arts, London. Danah is exposed to many, many students on a constant basis, and I'm absolutely thrilled that you're here. It's funny, I'm going to welcome both of you officially. Thank you so much for joining the call. The reason why I'm sort of stumbling is because both of you are unbelievably productive. Your bios are extremely long. Let's just start by saying, how do you have the time to do all of these things? Danah, let's start with you. There's kalimat, there's teaching, how are you doing all of this?
Well, I think I'm blessed with this thing I've inherited from my mother, is this incredible amount of energy. I guess I have more energy than a 4-year-old. So that helps. I think it's also I kind of subscribe to the idea that if you're interested in something, you make time for it.
Sure.
And that's it. And just, I guess it's the way my mind works. So the amount of things that I work on is just a representation of how my mind works, really.
Yeah. Haytham, what about you? Have you always been doing a million different projects at the same time?
First, I'm happy that you asked Danah first, so I can have the time to think about the answer. Now I have a good answer. I think I have a good answer. Now, honestly speaking, first of all, you see Haytham and then you read maybe the American University in Cairo, Carotronica, or many other stuff. But I mean, of course, it's not Haytham. It's a collaborative work. It's a teamwork. I have many people that work with me. It's not Haytham. That's first. Secondly, I will agree with Danah, when you always like things, you will always afford the time. I mean, when things are too heavy or we don't like it so much, we're like, oh, I don't have the time. But once it actually jumps to the top of your list of priorities, you will have the time. And I think that's the thing that really motivates me, like find the passion, the interest, and then I'm sure that I will find the time. Then it works out so far.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so with that, I want to talk about the title of today's sort of roundtable that we have going on, which is the future of education, and specifically sort of the future of education of design. These titles are always so open-ended that they could mean anything. But I'd like to just back up and start with the past of education. So as somebody who never studied design, how was design taught? And Haytham, I'll start with you, just because you are one of the two authors of the seminal book, The History of Arab Graphic Design. How have designers been taught design in the region for the last 100 years or so? What is the past of the education of design?
So I lost my privilege. Now I will have to answer before Danah. Sorry.
Yeah. On the spot.
No, I mean, from my experience, which again I will really refer to the book, is the history of design education is the history of art education. So there is no design education in the late 19th century, early 20th century. It was more about art education and of course in different disciplines within the art field. And then some of them, because of the need to live, they were looking for commission jobs. So commission jobs, which related mostly to maybe a little bit of interior design, sign design, and of course, many of them, they will go for the publishing industry, newspapers, magazines. So they work in layout, which they call it art direction. They work in illustrations. They work on cartoons and stuff like that. So it's learning by practice, not really by education. And of course it's schools in which again related to a publishing house and big publishing house in the Arab world, especially in Egypt and in Lebanon. And then you have, for example, a school of Al-Ahram. And then you will have many, a Goyo designer who started actually the art direction, Al-Ikhraj al-Fanni في Al-Ahram, and then it goes to find many graduates of the fine art school or the applied art school. They go to him and then they learn by practice. Yeah. Similarly, the school of Rosa Youssef and Sabah al-Khair, also in Egypt, Safir in Lebanon, in Nahar. So there is always a master guru works there and then attracts, because of his name and the name, of course, the newspaper, and also because they earn a little bit of money, that they can come and work with him. That's how it started in let's say, the first design education. So it's again by practice more really than by education. But this is until I would say until 1950s when it started implemented into curriculum in the Arab world.
Yeah, just like Dan, I see you sort of nodding your head. As somebody who didn't study this stuff, can you help me understand the difference or the effects of what Haytham just said, right? The implications, which is that the education of design is basically born out of the education of art. But these are two different disciplines, right? I mean, and the education should be different. So what are sort of the implications of the fact that the approach was the same throughout the 20th century, at least the first half of the 20th century? Is there an implication at all?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a really good question, because you're sort of seeing this shift in what a designer does in the past 20 years. And because there's a lot of people calling for design to be removed from the art schools, mainly because it's sort of, people see it as a more functional bit of art. And so it's largely, you know, you have students coming in thinking design is about personal expression when it's not. You always have a sort of, for lack of a better word, user involved in what you're creating. And so with this sort of marriage, I guess, between design, of course, there's a lot of similarities between design and art, but there's a lot of differences. And that's not saying that art is purely about personal expression. But if we think about what the problems are, again, lack of a better framing,
Sure.
talking about design as problem solving, is the fact that what we were doing 20 years ago and those jobs aren't necessarily the main jobs that designers have now. And so if you think of graphic design, which is the area that I'm most involved in, is you are developing user interfaces for things that we engage with on a daily basis that largely affect people's lives. They affect their mental health. They affect, you know, they make them kind of purchase more. They have all these dark patterns, things like that. So you're not necessarily just creating visuals for something, you are shaping ways of being. And that idea of how design has moved, I don't think that schools have necessarily caught up with it. And it is also because a lot of design programs are still in art and design schools. And in the case of, say, some of the design school that I work in, fine art was always kind of the main core, and then design kind of came as secondary. So that, I think, is the main implication. It's also just seen as as very much about serving a client, rather than seeing design that goes into a variety of industries, as we're seeing it now and in the past 20 years.
Yeah, do you think this idea of the problem, you know, there's this idea that, like, I was listening to a speech you gave. I told you about this right before we started the call. I was listening to the speech in defense of pessimism, essentially, where you were talking about this crisis in education of design, and that that people are not paying attention to or they're not solving the problems correctly. They're not paying attention to the user, and that designers often ignore the problem and maybe focus on aesthetic too much. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, is it that we are choosing, or we as designers are choosing not to solve the problem correctly, or is it that they're just not choosing the right problems to solve?
Again, a very interesting question. I think it's, I think what I try to get my students to do is to think about, okay, what is the problem, and does this problem need to be solved? Or is this actually the problem that I do need to tackle? I think when you're looking at something, you think, oh, well, this is the problem, rather than me doing the additional bit of research in order to really think about, is this the problem or is that the problem? Because I could also try and solve a problem and not consider the other series of problems that I'm going to create through the solution that I am proposing.
Yeah.
And so this is where I think education is key, because we need to start really thinking about how we are, I don't want to use the word training, but I'm going to use the word training, how we're training students to think of problems and how to approach them, and the unintended consequences of the things that they create. So that's the thing, is that it's like, well, if design is just this client, this service provider that's just married to a client, you think you don't actually have any agency in thinking about what problem you need to solve. And that comes to how well you can articulate what your role is as a designer, in my opinion, how you can articulate your role and what you can actually do and speak up and say, in fact, I think this is maybe what we need to do. And that's where that communication diplomacy skills that designers need really should be coming in handy, and should be something we emphasize as well in education.
Yeah, Haytham, go for it.
Yeah, maybe I jump to the conversation, because honestly speaking, I'm in academia since I was trained as a printmaker, like studied fine art in printmaking, and that was a long time ago. And then I shifted in terms of education between art to design, between applied from fine art to applied art with the terms which we normally use in our state universities here in Egypt. But what I would like to really, the idea of classification itself, which is what is really art and design. Honestly speaking, from somebody working in academia since more than 20 years now, is really, it's only in academia. Like only when you are obtaining a degree. So you need to be specialized to major, one of the majors, so you can have a degree in graphic design, product design, or printmaking or painting. But when it comes to real world and practices, honestly speaking, I don't use anymore. I use always the term creative practices. And then it depends. If it's functional, as Danah was just mentioning, it's designed, there is a client, you can sell it somewhere. If it's not functional, even if it's functional, but with it's exhibited in different context in a museum or a gallery, then it's an artwork. And so keeping really tracing the idea of let's classify what we are doing. Really, I'm not interested anymore about this. I tell my students, I'm just not giving my personal opinion. It's just telling my students, it depends about the context. And from a historical point of view, this shift between what is art and what is design, it's a long discussion, which takes you nowhere. And that's actually going back to the future of education, which is first, it's, if I might jump to this, Mike.
Yeah, jump.
It's first is like declassify. The classification is old. Don't classify things. Secondly, take them out of universities. Take them out from the university system. Deschooling them. It's the alternative education. It's not really an obtaining a degree in design in a university will teach you design. Will teach you problem solving creatively, if I would say. I mean, that's a longer discussion, but just I'm starting with this statement.
I want to talk about professional standards, professionalism, right? Which is to say, both of you educate designers, and it's like a superpower in a way, right? When you educate somebody, you enable them, you give them agency, you give them all these powers. But that doesn't mean that these will be used for good, right? Societal good. Are there limitations and sort of, are there like, is there a context of professionalism in which you encourage your students to say, solve only problems that you can really wrap your head around or that you even should be solving? And the problems that are not your problems to solve, make yourself small, back out of the room and let somebody who actually knows what they're talking about and is impacted by those problems, let them solve it. Is there like even a context in which this question makes sense?
I think this is where maybe you would, obviously, because a designer can't possibly solve everything because there's always other people involved. So how do they begin to create collaborations with people who are from very different disciplines than them, and how they begin to communicate with them in order to get to one solution amongst many possible solutions is how I like to think of design. I don't like to think of it as just there's one solution, because if there's one solution, then you say that that's the only solution to something and there's no other possibility for it to be solved. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think that where this comes in is usually in terms of context. There's a lot of this work where students want to work, they'll basically say, oh, I want to work on this in Africa, as though Africa is a country.
Yeah, this is what I mean.
Yeah, and so this is a big problem. Yes, I will definitely say, that's when you do talk to them and say, okay, what is the context in which you are based? What communities are closest to you? What interests you? So that's definitely something that I would step in and say, no, that's not a context that you want to work in. Because actually, if we're looking at London, there's a lot of problems to be solved here. And I think students tend to always look outward as if here is just this perfect space. We're seeing a little bit less of that. I think there's more kind of awareness. But for me, design is always a contextually based practice. And so it's important that students deal with where they are then and now. I mean, even in the location of the university is its own context. So I prefer that they do work within that's a constraint.
Yeah. Haytham, do you feel like this idea of locally centric design education, which Danah, you've worked on, I was curious to see, Haytham, in your context, do you feel like the students who come through your doors and leave, do you feel like you're preparing them specifically to work in a local context, or is the education that you're hoping to equip them with to say, hey, go out to other contexts, go to Brussels, go to Ghana, go to Dubai, go to Rome, go to Singapore. You're equipped to be a designer anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really like pointing them to site specific, like geographically speaking.
Yeah.
I mean, there is, like, but
there isn't the go to Ghana course.
No, Brazil, maybe Argentina, you know, but not that close. No, I'm just really because I teach at this semester, for example, speculative design, which is more, which going back to the Danah's answer, it's more really about the process. But and of course, when I really like, where I said like not really pointing them geographically speaking, but maybe regionally. So sometimes we look, I don't want to say force them, but at least highlight regional problems. Of course, with my historical background, like as somebody who wrote in history, which is very much interested in oh, you mentioned the book, I will talk about it later, but I could say, like, think from inside to outside. I mean, we are living in Cairo, a city was 1,000 years old. And then you live in Egypt, which is 1,000 years old. And then you have all this labeled identities. You have being an Arab, being a Muslim, being a Copt, and then you go a little bit Mediterranean, maybe African, and then those are questions. What does it mean, these questions, to you as an individual in this community? And then I don't really prevent them of thinking about global problems, like as a human beings, there is problems, global warming. If somebody comes to me with a global warming and, as a problem, and he would like to have a project to solve the global warming, I will not say no. But at the same time, there was much more to work here, which nobody is working on. So our graduation projects that we work mostly for, like, from a very tiny little district in the suburb of Cairo to really working on a projects like much bigger. Those are my personal projects, but in terms of what I'm teaching. So no, I keep it open to the students, but always I raise questions during the teaching process about what really all this surrounding means to you. So if they live in the city center and go to commute to New Cairo, whereas the American University in Cairo is it's around, like, from the city center to the university is 40 kilometers. This 40 kilometers extremely rich visually. There's tons of problems need to be solved visually, I would say. So that's the type of like highlighting to my students, but not really forcing them.
What about you, Danah? I'm curious, I guess the same question for you, because I'm curious how you approach this.
How I approach in terms of if they come with me with a global problem?
Yeah, I mean, as an advocate for locally centric design education, how do you approach as an educator?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Haytham was saying, you don't say no if someone is looking at the climate emergency. I mean, you could look at that. It is a very global thing, but then you want to kind of narrow down on something. And that's what is important for students to know, is that you can't look at something and I'm going to solve global warming for the entire universe, right? How do you kind of get them to narrow down the subject that they're looking at? Maybe they're looking at one particular thing that is possibly particular to London or the UK, or maybe even where they come from. Because everything is connected. Like, a lot of these issues are global issues, but to solve something, you need to be in that context in order to understand it fully. So you are looking at a global problem, but let's narrow that down and look at it from a local perspective. So I think that's what's important for educators to do, is that how do you actually make this project manageable, rather than the students could lose themselves into kind of trying to tackle something that is almost impossible and then just give up.
The sort of broader crisis of design education, I want to drill down a little more to understand what are some of the forces that are creating that crisis, and is there a way to sort of resolve those forces, and what is the sort of path forward to be able to improve that education? Then I'll start with you, and then maybe Haytham can talk about it.
How to improve design education?
Yeah.
Oof. Well, this is
Big question.
big question.
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Well, I think that I'll focus on something really small, which is that we need to start accepting the problems that we deal with now are very different from what we dealt with when these programs, and I'm speaking very much from the context in which I am based, which is the United Kingdom, and I guess with European and North American design education, which is quite similar, is that we have to stop focusing on thinking that design that was created, 100 years ago in terms of, and it found its place in the academy, is still applicable to what we're doing today. Because this is quite controversial. I think it's really great that students learn screen printing and they learn letterpress and they learn, all these older practices that we no longer use them anymore. You use them for aesthetic purposes, like if you're going to use letterpress, for example. But there is a big focus on that versus things that are extremely important, such as how we're dealing with digital interfaces, how we're tackling the kind of consequences of what it is that we make and how we think deeper about what we make, and also design expanding beyond the agency in the studio. So those are the types of things that I'm interested in right now. I think we're a bit too nostalgic for these old practices. I can't tell you how many people still want to work in editorial. And I find that really, really fascinating, because there isn't that many jobs in editorial anymore, right? But we're still dealing with that in this day and age. And so that's what I would focus on. Now, of course, I could probably talk for hours about this, but I'll let Haytham give his take.
Don't do that. No, I again, the program where I teach now is at the American University. I have great colleagues, mostly know all of them: Bahia, Balia, Ahmed, Jochen, Nagla, and those, we have a vision, which it's collective vision. Again, I'm not going to talk about individually, because we do all this together. And from our approach, when we started this program, is really the idea of interdisciplinarity in design, and open the eyes for different practices in design, and with a certain extent, for sure, and then and let them and focus so much about the process itself more than the final outcome, which is part of the problem solving, and getting them really so much engaged in the community with social aspects, especially like getting into the community, because again, we have students of the American University in Cairo, which somehow is like privileged students. So, and then look at things also from a perspective of partnerships, working with different institutions, other NGOs or private institutions or academic institutions like other universities, and then give them exposure, like to, again, one is a global context, secondly is the community itself. And actually here, which is very interesting to hear from Danah, that it's the opposite. My students, like they are more interested in digital more than traditional. So, and we try to balance both. And then again, like give them the opportunity to choose, because there is market for editorial design in the Arab world, which is different than in Europe and in the US. And but we try to balance between the traditional techniques which are used in design, and then give them more of the interactive media design. And that's what we try to do as a program so far. Not really. And again, it's a challenge because it's American University in Cairo is a privileged university, but we try to work with state universities and again other universities so we can have more collaborative work. And I'm with the idea again of deschooling, and I'm telling them what you learn is really just guidance. What you will learn outside of this institution is much more than what you will learn from us. We are just here to hopefully to guide you, but not really to teach you. That's what I say to my students.
Yeah.
Well, if I can just add to that, I think it's an interesting statement because I think when you come to university, I don't necessarily expect you to end up being a designer when you graduate, because you're teaching them critical thinking skills. You're teaching them to become active agents and citizens of society. That, okay, well, I could make this stuff, or I can think differently, and that could be applicable to different industries, in policy, whatever. I'm not necessarily training people for a job in industry. I think you learn a lot more on the job with design. You learn a lot in university, and you learn how to think and how to think critically and how to, explore different ideas. But it isn't necessarily a training ground for you to have here job ready, sent out into the market type of thing. That's not what universities are about. I think they're becoming that way particularly here with the introduction of tuition fees, where there's this expectation that to pay off these fees, I need a job. And I need a job in the exact industry that I was trained in. I have a degree in graphic design. I need to work in graphic design. But that defeats the purpose of what the university was created for. And I think it's hard to remind students of that when they're kind of drowning in debt. We're living in a world that doesn't have much hope in it, if I'm honest. But I think that's what, take advantage of that 3-4 years or whatever it is to think about your place in the world and how you could possibly maybe make it a better place.
But that's our perspective with the students, but not the parents.
The
Well, yeah. I mean, the idea of deschooling, because on one side, I hear this idea that come in and have a mentally expanding experience, study this as a means to understand how to think and how to understand complex ideas and how to be how to dive deeply into something that's difficult and navigate through that. But on the other side, there's also this secondary conversation, the secondary comment, which is all the real skills that you're going to need to execute this trade, you're going to learn on the job. So I wonder if, Haytham, can you sort of dive a little more deeply into this idea of deschooling and what that would even look like? I mean, given these two different ideas at the same time.
Yeah, the deschooling as a term is really very old. It's the 60s.
Yeah.
But at least in our context as design, and which is, I really call it, first of all, it needs courage. Maybe it's, I hate to say that, but maybe it's not yet our community is ready for that, for the idea of deschooling. That's why I mentioned the parents previously in my comment. Mm-hmm. But it needs courage, needs boldness, because as you said, like most of the things that you will learn in the job, it's what actually could be conducted in an alternative programs. It could be customized. It could be different time frame, different type of practices within inside the problems, which is in the university. We try as educators, but not necessarily have full control of the system. That's why I was one of the people against completely the idea of university or art academy, which is the idea of academy or a school of art and design, but not part of an university system, which Europe, I think in the 2000 gave up the idea, and then they became the Bologna system. So they became to have all degrees similar, which is crisis for me. So if you look at the system in Germany and France and Italy, which I'm talking about now about Europe, it's when it's part of the academy, then the system is completely functional, which customize more for the students. When it becomes part of a global system, a curriculum that you need to follow, credits that you need to finish, then it becomes more like ticking boxes. And it doesn't matter if you learn or not. You pay the tuition fees, you take the credits, and then you get a degree. And then when it comes to the market, it's totally different world. So we try to be, as educators, the in-betweeners, to prepare them at least to the real world in terms of like problem solving and working in design. But and I'm telling you about this schooling, but from someone who is actually working in education in a university, chairing a department, which again is my religion, I would say.
I'm going to ask you both a question that may seem counterintuitive, but I'll go for it. Does the world need more designers?
No.
So expound on that.
I would just say, yes, need problem solvers, not designers. Creatively, again, creative problem solvers, not necessarily with the term designers. Then I leave it again to Danah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's becoming a bit of a factory, if I'm honest. I think the way that things are going. Look, I think the world always needs more design. The world is terribly designed, right? But it doesn't need more bad designers, personal expression. Do you see what I mean? I think I'm happy for more people to engage in design, because I think it's a valuable way of thinking for, people who, again, won't become designers. But I think with the numbers that you're seeing in universities, schools, everywhere, there's a lot of demand for design, which I think is great. But I think that, it's being taken advantage of and just become this factory. The other thing is that with design, it's such a vast, it's now kind of covering different industries. And so if we start to look at it, that you could work as a designer or apply the ways of design, again, for lack of a better word, design thinking, because that's been kind of hijacked by a specific space, which I don't necessarily agree with, is that that's applicable to different industries and could possibly make the world more interesting way of approaching different problems. Like Haytham is saying, is creative problem solvers, to think differently about things rather than in a very sort of, typical way. I can't solve something, I'm not going to kind of carry on forward, rather than as a designer, you're looking at different angles of how you could possibly solve a problem, and what you could bring what you can bring to the problem. So yeah, I'm against the idea of the factory of designers, for sure, which is what it's becoming through education. But the idea of more creative thinkers, I think the world really lacks that, and that's what we definitely need.
Yeah. Haytham, do you have something to add?
No, Danah said it all.
The reason why I ask is because I'm calling in from Beirut, and I've lived here for quite some time. I grew up here. And in 2019, when the sort of the revolution started here, I found myself extremely frustrated, because we have beautifully designed political slogans, beautifully branded political parties, revolutionaries. They're gorgeous. The typography is perfect, but no policy. Such little substance. And I kept on joking that, like, can we please trade in every five graphic designers for a couple policy wonks? Like, we have too many graphic designers. We need people who are interested in sort of like solving environmental problems, and solving traffic problems, and solving tax issues, and we need to design those types of solutions. But is that just I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, am I just using the verb design and that's the overlap? Or should there actually be some sort of education for that? Are you trying to teach, should these schools be teaching the same principles that designers learn to all these other different departments? Is there actual overlap, or it's just sloppy language overlap?
No, I mean, it could really get complicated if you went to the terms, when it's used. But again, put it into context, because design is a method. And what they see beautifully, like good typography, nice colors, It's the tools, that's the language, that's how they communicate. But the subject itself, what they will tackle, for example, like any of them mentioned problem in Beirut, it's again, it needs that this intellectual entity, this person, think about the solution using design as a tool first. And it's exactly the same as doing a nice poster for a movie. It's exactly trying to solve the problem of gasoline in by awareness campaign. They have the same tools, but then again, it's this intellectual entity. He needs to be aware and conscious about the problem, then using his tools to solve the problem. And so it's not either or. It's there, but they need to use the tool.
Yeah, Danah, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, I mean, there's certain things that are terribly designed that designers aren't necessarily trained for. For example, documents, right? How to fill in tax documents, how to fill in certain forms. A lot of it is also based on intuition, which is, you have this whole market of UX, which is user experience, user interfaces. A lot of these people aren't actually trained designers. And so they're not applying those design principles. That's why a lot of stuff online and a lot of apps, a lot of websites are really badly designed, actually. But this idea of a method of different ways of thinking, different ways of knowing, of kind of trying to get people to use their imagination to think of solving problems in a different way, or the possibilities within the set of constraints that they have, is where design can be very valuable. Now, again, I've said it several times here, is that you have, designers are tackling a whole series of different problems, working in different sectors. So they need to be more aware of the world in which they work in. And yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right for saying, yes, you're using it in that way, but at the same time, yes, a lot of it, sometimes it is a design problem. It could be a designer involved with the people who are looking at different ways that traffic moves, for example.
Okay. I hate to do this, but I have to get to the rapid fire questions, and then we're going to open it up to everybody. I could talk about this for hours with you. Okay, let's keep on going. And to both of you, maybe we'll start with Danah, then Haytham. What are you reading or watching right now? No judgment.
All About Love by Bell Hooks.
Okay, interesting. Very nice. Very quick answer. Haytham?
Danah, are you done? I thought that's the first, and then you go for the second and the third, because I have a long list of stuff here.
Haytham, before you answer, yeah, you can pick one, but
you said rapid fire.
Yeah, rapid fire. What is it? What is it though? Give us a little.
No, but I don't have it like this because I read 4 books at the same time. Let's say I don't really read one book. If I said like I read 1 book. It depends about the timing and what I'm doing and so on. So I'm working for research about Nasser. So I read a book called Nasser in the Egyptian Imaginary. Also, I read another book which related to the speculative design course where I teach, which is called Design for Different Futures. And it's about different practices, about the artists and designers using speculative design as a method. I read another book about the Greeks and the build of modern Egypt. And it depends. It's just like all together at the same time. So I will stop here.
Amazing. That's great. Danah, I hope you feel sufficiently shamed.
I mean, I'm not going to give you the list because it's just like Haytham. I always only read 4 books at the same time, but most of them are just boring and dull. So I just picked the one that most people will be like, oh, okay, I could probably read that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, who would you love, Danah? We'll start with you again. Who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
I'm going to pick 2 people, Edward Said and George Habash.
Interesting. At any particular points in their life, or?
I think for George, probably the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And for Edward, late 80s, early 90s.
Very cool. Haytham?
I have it a little bit more very personal, which is I will start with my father, God bless his soul, that I always wanted to really shadow him, and I'm more in his life, but now actually I'm more curious to shadow him in his afterlife. Like I would love to be there with him.
Beautiful.
And then I would secondly is a very dear person to me, which is Nagi Shekel. He's an artist, a late artist and designer. One of the people I wrote about him in the book, which I interviewed him last year before he dies, and then he didn't see actually the book. He didn't see, I curated also an exhibition for him. He didn't see the exhibition, and actually I'm publishing a book about him. But he lived for more than 80 years, and I wasn't lucky enough to be with him at his journey and learned a lot about him because of my research, but after he left us. So I would love to shadow him, not for a day, for more than a day.
Great. Thank you. Danah, what do people most misunderstand about your work?
That it's grounded in cynicism and has no applicability to the real world. That's what I think.
Yeah. Haytham?
I was trying to think because defining people like audience, because from my experience, my early artworks, which is mostly like really classical prints or drawings, and always and there was also photography and screen prints and stuff like that, but was always with a social problem. And I always, I work also mostly with what I call them unseen people within our community. So I did a project about the porters, Shayalin, in the railway station in Egypt. I did a project about the blind people, blind community in Egypt. But always when I am starting a project, working on it, I'm always attacked and people not getting it until I spend time and more time, and then they start to really understand what they want to do. So I don't know if it's more, I don't know. Sometimes I feel just with the way how I look like. I don't have any explanation why people, they start aggressively when they see me, when they start the conversation, they start working about things. And then once we have a longer time together, conversation, and then things gets better with time.
Amazing. Okay. Last question. Outside of your profession, whose work inspires you? Danah, we'll start with you and then Haytham.
I'm going to use one that's going to make everyone laugh, but you got to bear with me. I'm going to say Janet Jackson. And I'm going to say Janet Jackson because I think it's really inspirational that she has managed to have an extremely successful career living in the shadow of a very successful brother. And also that she had this she was a sort of feminist icon. I don't know if you're familiar with a lot of Janet's music, but when she said, I think it was the album Control, when she said, no, my first name ain't baby, it's Janet, Miss Jackson if you nasty, was such a kind of, in a way, profound statement of, this woman making a very feminist statement way before, and I think paving the way for a lot of artists and their opinions now. And even something like Rhythm Nation was very political. So Janet wasn't afraid to express her ideas through her music. And I think I find that very inspirational. Yeah.
Fantastic choice. Haytham?
I'll be quick. I again, with the profession, I don't know which profession, but I would something really I don't practice much at the moment, which is drawing and animate my drawings, which I will go for William Kentridge. He's a South African artist, and he's forever my inspirational figure as an intellectual entity.
Okay, great. So we're going to start with the questions. Our first question comes from, let me get this right. I always have a hard time saying your name. Please, Royer.
Hi, Danah. Hi, Haytham. Hi, Mikey. Thanks
Hi.
for this super, super cool talk. So many questions, so many thoughts. I'm just going to focus on one or just the one I typed. This idea of deschooling, declassifying, context specific. I'm wondering and this is just a question for us to maybe to think about, in a context or in a country where university has become kind of a business, right? Like you're providing a service, people want to get a degree because they want to make sure they have a job. Parents play a big role in this and all of that. And in a university or in a context where design was so outdated for so long, and just in a matter of maybe 5 years, give or take, curriculum started to shift drastically. And this led to the misunderstanding of the discipline, because obviously universities were not able to explain what the discipline is or what design is. And it's not just graphic design, it's not all of that stuff. How do you move from a mindset in a perception of design, of a discipline that is very, let's say, single disciplinary, that is very print-based, very graphic-based, very, let's say, output-based, to a more problem-solving, more creative thinking, more kind of a, as you said earlier, Haytham, you were saying, like kind of intellectual process, kind of more of a competency, right? Not just a skill, not just a tool. How do you shift from a kind of an earlier perspective to a new perspective and sell that to students, telling them, you know, you're coming to the university and we cannot promise you, or we cannot tell you that when you graduate, you're going to be a UX designer or a product designer or a graphic designer. It's just, we're giving you specific tools for you to make that decision and to kind of place yourself in whatever field, industry, whatever you want. How do you make that shift? Is there a way? And how do you convince parents that this is a valuable skill that is worth graduate education money?
Don't convince parents. We don't.
In a context where parents obviously play a huge role in kids' education, right? I mean, in Lebanon, this is very different from Europe and in North America. I mean, in Lebanon, because I'll speak to this because that's what I know, right? Students come to university, to graduate school with their parents, and they make a decision. I mean, they help with that. And they ask you, is my child going to have a job afterwards, and how much is that job, is the job going to pay them? And when you tell them, I don't know, and I can't tell you that, and I can't promise you that, it's going to be a way of thinking, etc., that is a turnoff, right? Like parents are like, no, maybe I don't want to do this. I want to put my child in a more defined discipline. So just thinking, how is there a way to kind of make that shift in a way that doesn't damage the discipline more than it's already damaging it?
If you don't mind, then I would just try to answer at least my perspective quickly. So first of all, thank you for the question. And again, what I'm saying, it's not really, I'm working on that within an institution, which, as you know, in Lebanon and Egypt and many other countries around, that the education is a business. So you try to make the change from inside to outside, but this needs really individual efforts, and there's a vision. So my colleagues and myself, we're working on that of the openness of the program. So, but I mean, it's a set of skills of the educators themselves, that they will be open enough, and also they have from their own interest and also practice to have this an interdisciplinary approach towards design and art, so they can actually open to the students' roads, so they can discover and question and then learn by themselves. And then once they are graduating, they can find a path. So far, which we graduated like 6, the program at AUC is not really new, but we graduated like the last 6 years, from 15 until now. And they have actually good startups in the market, not necessarily in graphic design. And some of them, they're really very successful, which is, again, not a measure for success when I have to define what the success is. But again, at least there is a level of satisfaction from my colleagues about our graduates. So this is one thing. And so again, it's individual efforts coming from inside the institution, having together a vision of how we define design for the future, our future designers. Secondly, it's about parents. I mean, the answer, not an answering, is really a very awkward answer for a parent. We have the same thing. Parents, they want to actually choose design because it's a profession. They will graduate like semi-engineers. They will have a job once they graduate. And when I said, like, no, he will not be a graphic designer. He might do design for films. So I might work for film industry. Some of them, they have majoring design, but also work in music technology. They will do music for for films, or they will work with theater students. They might have, I have students, they have startups of product design, like, or not really product design, I would say furniture design. Small startups, you mixing typography with architecture, and so stuff like that. So I open again the possibilities for parents, but not limiting it. And then who knows?
Great. Do you mind if I jump to the next question for the sake of it? And Haytham, Danah, do you have time to go 5 minutes over just to get a few more questions in? Is that okay?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay, Besma, you're up next.
Hey, my question is really short. I just want to get your views on the concept of decolonizing design.
I think you're going to have to elaborate on that. What particular?
Well, I mean, you're 1/7 of decolonizing design, and Haytham wrote, the amazing book, History of Arab Graphic Design. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how the idea of revisionist histories, or the idea of looking back on the legacy of Western design in education, and how we can sort of shed light on other ways of being and knowing and approaching design in education.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the conversation on decolonizing design has very much been grounded in people thinking that it's a revision of history, when it really isn't. It's a transformation and subversion of that which exists. And that goes back to a lot of the, talking about this idea of disciplinary boundaries, talking about, Druier's question, which is, how do you convince parents and students of thinking of design in a different way? That is that shift of, do we actually need disciplines in design? Do we actually need the discipline of design? And that's a conversation about decolonizing design. Right now, it's just about how do we begin to integrate different voices? And yes, that's interesting, other ways of knowing, but it's much more than that. It's how we actually begin to subvert these structures, transform them. What is it that we need to really be? So even the university itself, the university structure itself is kind of, complicit in colonial structures, and whose knowledge is valued over others. Because what you could do is that what you could easily do, which is a bit of a danger, is that you substitute a set of people for another. When it comes to history, this concept of history that is based on the single solo genius, which people come in thinking this is what design is about, that design is the work of one person. Design is never the work of one person. That's a myth, right? And so of how we begin to write history based on these hero figures, and thinking about how we write that, how we kind of, sorry, I just lost my train of thought now. These ideas of like how you,
I think you were saying the ways
hero figures.
Yeah, ways in which that we attempt
how
to
you radically rethink everything that you know, and that you bring in different ways of thinking, knowing, and being. So this idea of the pluriversal, and this concept of I think what I'm sort of very upset about with this conversation is that it is entirely about, okay, let's just bring in different voices and it's just grounded in history. But no, it's really actually about how we really consider what is it that we learn, what is considered knowledge, how our relationship with nature. I think this is a big one. Now you're kind of seeing that a little bit of that discovery, whereas a lot of indigenous populations have been, this is kind of their work for thousands of years, right? To question consumption, to question specific structures, rather than just thinking about reforms. So I think I'll stop there, and I'll hand it over to Haytham.
I will try to be short, because I know, I mean, I honestly, Danah, what you just said, it's great, but it is about decolonizing ourselves, not only design, how we rethink everything. So how we redefine everything. But I will take it from what you said just to our field, which is I would say first from redefining what is design, because the term itself is a very colonial term. So design existed before the term design already invented. So, and I'm working on a project about history of design in Africa, or actually defining what is design in Africa, which is was by Western historians was called art, but it's actually more about design. And then I will not, and again, I will just really brief. So we think about redefining the term itself. And then we have, again, education. So all educational system is colonial educational system. So redefining, again, our educational systems. And then I will not ignore history, because again, educational system, they build on history, that it's part of the curriculum, and then the world needs to be informed. So if there is nobody saying it loud with different means, then still will be individual decolonizing the culture, try to make a difference within the communities. But within the academic institution, we need to inform our future generations about how to decolonize, who did what, also part of the approach itself. I will stop here because I know there is many questions, Mikey, right?
Yeah, sure, great. So I think my question actually dovetails really nicely with what you were both just talking about in response to Basma's question here. My question is, what are the necessities and implications of the future of education, particularly design education, within the region?
No, but I mean, I would like actually Diane to elaborate a little bit more. But it's like, yes, I'm located in the region, more interested in the region, but can you elaborate a little bit more there?
Sure, yeah. So you're talking a little bit about decolonizing design, the relevancy within design education in the region. I want to understand from your perspective, what's the necessity of that? What are the implications of it? How do you see the connections between the local and the global? Yeah.
I mean, that needs another hour to try to answer this question.
Absolutely. So I think there's a lot here to unpack, and
I would just try to be again just brief as much as I can. First of all, I mean, I can give you a very small example which makes it really sad to me, at least. So I teach history of graphic design, the book you know, and then I was talking about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and which is one of the pan-Arab projects in terms of design and visual culture. And I'm talking about Palestine and talking about Arab cities, and then I should give a little bit telling them about the designs for the Arab-Israeli conflict, and then who is the most like influential designers who contributed to the cause itself. And some of my students, they know nothing. They don't know where is the cities, which country they are located. And I stopped teaching this lesson. And then I asked them, I want to draw the map, and I want them to pinpoint the cities where I'm talking about. And I don't want to say I was shocked, but I mean, when we talk about the history of the Queen, I know students know about the history of the Queen more than they know about the Arab-Israeli conflict. And that's saddening me. So I don't mind to know that they know about the history of the Queen, but they need to know about the history of the region, that's why they are enrolled in a course called the History of Arab Graphic Design. So that's for me a very simple example, but there's much more to say about this.
I hope you point them to Africa events, Haytham.
If I could just say a little bit on that, I don't know if I'm necessarily going to be answering your question, but I think that there's a really big opportunity with, I guess, the Arab region. But the Arab region itself is also kind of different worlds within a world as well. So we can't forget that, Egypt is a very different place from Lebanon, and a very different place from Iraq. And then you have Palestine and Jordan. There's this possibility of, we have almost a copy-pasted curriculum from design that was created in a specific context. And we have an opportunity to make something that is really grounded in the problems that we have in the Arab region, but also in our language. And then you're beginning to develop new ways of speaking about design and allowing students the confidence to speak about design in Arabic, I think has a very powerful implication for the future of the region and the way that we connect with the space that we're in. So I think that would be my very short response to it.
Great. Thank you, Diane. Haytham, Danah, thank you so much for sharing your time and your perspective with us. As we all said, this could be a 10-hour, week, year conversation. And so thanks for doing the work that you're doing and for shedding light on what you've been thinking about.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Yeah. All right, everybody, enjoy your night or day wherever you are.